Hello there and welcome to 10 Walks Explain the Netherlands. I'm Nicholas Walton and this is the fourth walk that I'm hoping will explain the Netherlands. I'm making 4 videos out of each. This is the second video of the fourth walk. I'm on the island of Texel, actually approaching the dunes, going through the forest on the northern edge of this large island. That's one of the WWII Islands. It sits above the north coast of the Netherlands. Now the reason that I'm on Texel is because for me it symbolises the way that the Dutch back in the 16th and especially the 17th century really went out into the world to try and find out, you know, what they could do. Could they get into the spice trade? Could they see if there were routes to the Indies, etc.? And of course they ended up having this enormous empire. The Dutch East Indies, the archipelago that stretched from the tip, well, Sumatra really, all the way through to New Guinea, and they had other territories and little forts and outposts all over the world. And of course over in the West Indies they had sugar plantations rammed full of slaves. So I'm just trying to work out which way to go. It's all very, very badly signposted. I haven't got a particularly workable map, but this is, over there is the sea basically, and that's where I'm hoping to get to. So I don't think I'm far away. I think I might, no, that looks like that's a bike track. I don't want to be nailed by a Dutch cyclist. And then just like that, the landscape changes. Come out of the woods, which is just over there to my right, and these are the dunes. It's all sand. There's lots of bits of shell that I'm walking on underfoot. There's heather. A lot of it's flowering because it's the beginning of the autumn. Shrubs, little hollows full of water. Often lots of water birds knocking around in this type of landscape. And sometimes you find just the odd stranded pine or oak as well, often weathered and battered and knocked almost diagonal. These sand dunes, they're not just a beautiful part of the coast and a lovely habitat for all kinds of birds and animals. They're flood protection. Look at these. This of course is the high ground. This is like natural dikes. So the whole of the sea, whole of the coast has got sand dunes like these around them. And what also happened here actually during the Second World War was that this was a vital part of the Atlantic Wall, which stretched from the border between France and Spain all the way up to the top of Denmark. The Nazi defences against seaborne invasion. Actually, just while I'm on the subject of the Second World War, when I was on the outside of the town where I started this walk, I passed the cemetery, and there was the Commonwealth war graves. So you're talking about bombers on the way over from places like Lincolnshire, just across the North Sea, and they were flying into the Reich, into Germany, to bomb targets like the Ruhr Valley, and they encountered flak, so anti-aircraft fire, as they were passing Texel. And there were night fighters as well in this area. It's a lovely old Citroen van. Up the final slope, up the final sand dune, taking the views, and then there'll be the sea in front of us. There's a trawler just offshore there, being trailed by so many birds. Must have a net out full of fish. I've had to put on my rain jacket. It looks as though it's not going to last, but there's certainly a bit of a shower above me. It's a bit annoying because it's almost too warm to wear one. Turned out to be a bit more of a cloudburst than I'd expected, so I'll take a bit of shelter. Although I'm underneath these eaves on a beach hut and they're dripping. Trying to avoid those drips as well. Anyway, there was, let's get back to the Dutch East Indies. Yeah, after spices, not really plantations, but they started something called the cultivation system in the 19th century as a way to make the whole place financially more viable. And that meant that everyone had to turn over a fifth of their land to cash crops, which were basically a way of the Netherlands just basically taking advantage of everybody. And it was pretty brutal, pretty successful, and a lot of those fifths were actually doubled to 2/5 of land because it was proving so lucrative. And this was the background for possibly one of the most famous novels in the Dutch language, called Max Havelaar. The actual title is a lot longer than that, but look it up. And Max Havelaar was basically it was a story of coffee trading, but also the way the cultivation system was deeply unfair and stripping money away from the poor people of places like Java, and it caused a sensation. So much so that, I mean, two legacies were: one, they eventually scrapped the cultivation system and changed it to the plantation system, which was a lot more humane. And second, the fair trade brand in the Netherlands is Max Havelaar. It's called Max Havelaar, which is shows that it was extremely influential. So the Dutch Empire of the 20th century was a very different place to those glory days, as they might see it, back in the 17th century, the golden age of the Dutch East Indies and the West Indies, where extreme wealth came from sugar and spices, and the Netherlands was a global power. By the 20th century, it was really just hanging on. What was the point of empire? Well, there was still prestige, and it did bring in money. I mean, oil was being discovered, and they were scrabbling around trying to find ways to raise money from the locals. Still a lot of unpleasantness going on. But then in the middle of the 20th century, there were a couple of enormous events. First of all, in 1940, the Germans invaded the Low Countries on the way to France, and the Dutch army capitulated. The royal family fled across the sea to the Netherlands, to England, and well, that was the mother country of a vast global empire, had just collapsed. And then in 1941, same thing, but in the Dutch East Indies at the hands of the Imperial Japanese, who invaded, worked their way along, I think, along the coast of Java to the capital. And once again, the Dutch army put up very little resistance. There were some horrible incidents. There were some British and Australians and Kiwis fighting on the Dutch side. They'd just seen places like Singapura and Malaya fall, and there was one particular battle where the Japanese killed hundreds of I think Australian and British prisoners. Correct me if I'm wrong. Basically killed them all on the beach, beheaded them all after taking them prisoner. This was a desperate time. There were internment camps. There was mass starvation. You know, a lot of the locals had actually welcomed the Japanese as an Asian empire that was liberating them from the Dutch, but the Japanese turned out worse, and they certainly didn't prioritize anyone other than Japanese when it came to the rice stocks. And that was the result of that was mass starvation. There were massacres. There was a lot of the women, whether Dutch or local, were recruited. I say recruited, that's a horrible term. They were put into Japanese army brothels in absolutely disgusting conditions. So it was a really, really, really horrible situation. And the years under the Japanese occupation were absolutely grotesque. One thing that maybe sums up the situation under the Japanese was the commander of the invasion forces, Hitoshi Imamura. He was meant to be slightly more enlightened than a lot of the Japanese commanders. But at the end of the war, he was eventually put on trial and sentenced to 10 years for what he'd done. And he served those 10 years. And when he came out, he felt such remorse for what had taken place under his command and for what the Japanese had done in general, that he built an exact replica of the prison cell where he had served those 10 years. He built it in his garden, and he shut himself in there, and he lived in this prison cell in his own garden until he died. a decade or so later. So if he felt such remorse, you can only imagine what it was like under less humane, is that the word, under other Japanese commanders. Now, towards the end of the war, a lot of the Dutch really felt as though they need to look again to the Dutch East Indies. But after those long war years, after those capitulations to the Japanese and to the Nazis, I think that it was obvious that things would change, and I think that's going to be the subject of the third of these walks on this beautiful island of Texel.